Hello, everybody. Welcome to another fantastic episode of Dev Tips. I probably say that every time, but you know what? They just keep getting better and better, and today is no exception. I have with me a fantastic creator, content producer, podcaster, Jonathan Cutrell. Say hello, Jonathan.
Hey, everybody, and thanks for having me, Travis.
Oh man, I'm so glad. I'm so grateful that you stayed up late to have this conversation. Where are you at right now?
Chattanooga, Tennessee. So it's on the far eastern side of Chattanooga, or of Tennessee, rather. And so it's
Right.
Eastern time, and I think you're on Pacific time.
Yeah, all the way across the country. And so you stayed up late for me, and I really appreciate your sacrifice. Everybody that's watching this, John is going out of his way to be awesome for us. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you
So
for
as
having
a
me.
oh sorry, what?
I said thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. Okay. So as I mentioned before, Jonathan is a podcaster. Jonathan's podcast. How long ago did you start it, Jonathan?
The official release of the first episode was January 5th, so
Jan-
just over 2 months.
Wow. That's amazing considering how much content you've put out so far. So the podcast name is DeveloperTea, and the concept is that you can listen to an entire episode and it'll take you about as long as it takes to brew and consume a nice cup of warm tea, and you'll have Jonathan's sweet manly voice whispering in your ear the whole time. Am I off on saying that?
Uh, Look, that's totally a subjective opinion. I'm not going to say either way. It's you make your own call.
So I want to jump right into it. When you opened up when you started your podcast, the first episode I listened to is the first one you made, and it's on one of the topics that's just like really like dear to me, and it like gets me going. It's on the topic of focus.
Yeah.
I love the way that you debunk multitasking, and the thing that you said about how focus is one of the most important skills for a developer to cultivate. It really kind of struck home with me. Can you tell us a little bit about why you think focus, the skill of focus, is so much more important than mastering your IDE or a new language or a technology?
Sure. So it's kind of along the lines of it's like a prerequisite, right? So if you went and got your 101, like your computer science degree, then computer science 101 is a prerequisite to everything else that you're learning. You have to understand, a while loop, and you have to understand an if clause and all of these things before you really can start learning the rest of computer science, before you can dive into algorithms, for instance. So I feel like focus is kind of a fundamental kind of core skill that you need to have, and you can't really master an IDE effectively until you can focus first, because it
Right.
takes focus to be able to master an IDE.
Right. It's a walk before you can run kind of thing.
Sure.
Interesting. So can you expand on the idea? And I really love the way you put this in your first podcast. You talked about pull over push and how that relates to focus.
Absolutely. So we're in an age now, and you're probably watching this while you are doing or trying to do two or three other things, maybe in the background. There may be half of you or so that are watching this solely doing this one thing, and you have your time set aside to watch this show. But a significant number of you are probably trying to do 5 things at once throughout your day. And if you look at your phone right now, I bet you about half of you also have a notification that's waiting on you, that some application probably thinks is necessary for you to have to go throughout your day. But the reality is, it's very difficult for us to go throughout our day effectively when we're constantly being barraged by all of the media, right? So we have email, and we have text, and we have our boss coming up to our desk, and we have this and that and the other, phone calls, whatever, on top of the fact that we're trying to, we'll take the same example, master our IDE. So while you're mastering your IDE, is that the time that you need to know that Netflix has the next episode of a show on it? Like, there's no need for you to have that push notification sent to your phone until you really want it, right? Until you are saying to yourself, you know what, it's time for me to watch my favorite show on Netflix. At that point, you pull. So rather than allowing Netflix to push that message to you, you go and get that message. And the same is true not only for superfluous things like Netflix, but also necessary things like work communication and pretty much anything else that would otherwise be a push notification.
That's a problem for me because when I first started using smartphones, and like when you install a new app and it says like, "Hey, can we send you push notifications?" I used to always be like, "Yeah, of course you can."
Yeah.
And now like all of these random old apps just like push me notifications all the time. So like I'm in like this bucket of like all
Oh,
these notifications are coming at me.
it's kind of crazy because most often now your brain has become so used to those notifications that they're meaningless, right? So, like, I know that I did this with my email recently. I can go through my email and know that I'm just going to go ahead and mark like 20 emails as read without even reading them. And it's like subscription emails and stuff. It's like, why do I have, I'm very clearly, I'm wasting time doing that, right? So in the same way, I'm wasting time looking at my phone and seeing these notifications that I don't need them, right? More than anything, they're just cruft.
Totally. Do you even turn your email notifications off?
I do, yeah. So I
Everything.
actually only go and get my email. There are
Wow.
very few notifications that actually stay on my phone. I keep phone calls and text messages on, but like for instance, when I'm recording a podcast, that stuff would completely destroy my focus to be able to record a podcast. So I turn
Totally.
off all notifications, like, and throw my phone across the room essentially when I'm recording a podcast because I have to be totally zoned in. And I feel like a lot of people don't recognize that the same could be true of their work or even like side projects. If you really actually completely removed all of the stuff and really focused, you'd be surprised at how much you can actually get done.
Mm. I put my phone into do not disturb mode like maybe a few weeks ago,
Yeah,
and I'm like, wow, this is nice. And I haven't taken it off, even like during prime time, like even like when like my wife is gonna call me because she's on my favorites, right? So it'll come through. But
sure.
like do not disturb mode is like my new favorite thing.
Yeah, it's surprising. We think that if we don't have our phone, for instance, just imagine 10 years ago and what life was like, like without a cell. I guess 10 years ago you had cell phones, but like, how did our parents survive without constant push notifications? Even if all you had was the ability to call somebody, we think that things are more urgent than they are. And the reason that we
Totally.
think that is because we've allowed ourselves to disseminate information to each other that is urgent on a minute to minute basis.
Hmm.
So I'm constantly connected, and most of my friends are constantly connected. We're at each other's like arm's length reach, essentially. It's I can text my friend, and if he doesn't text me back within 5 minutes, I feel like, oh, there's got to be something wrong. What's going on? But in reality, what all do we do within 5 minutes that's so urgent that we should be hearing back that quickly? It's kind of crazy.
That brings back so many memories. Like we used to like leave your house not knowing if your friend was gonna actually meet you at the spot, like, and you would get there and be like, "Where are you? I can't call you." Like, what's,
You know what's funny about that? My wife and I just watched Aziz Ansari's new live special in
Oh
Madison
yeah,
Square Garden, and he talks about exactly this. I highly recommend it. But he talks about how, like, if they didn't show up in 15 minutes, the reason that they didn't show up is because they're dead. Like, they couldn't make it because you can't cancel. Like, you can't cancel at that point. They
totally.
must have died.
It's the only logical explanation.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to go back to your podcast for a second. I think it's your second episode is about learning,
Yep.
and I really like the way you like really underlined it and kind of like you did a bold and underline the idea that as developers we need to be in a process of continual learning. It's not just like go and get your degree or go learn this one thing and then you're good. It's like every day you're learning more. Can you talk to me a little bit about the involvement of measurement in learning?
Sure. So I think I even mentioned it in that particular podcast that we do learning through our lives once we've gone past school. in like the opposite way that we did it when we were in school. So, and what I mean by that is everything in school is done with some sort of metric behind it. So you have a semester, or you have a class time, or you have a grade, or you have, different markings to kind of tell you, hey, this is how you're learning, this is how you're progressing. And then when we get past school, we have this tendency to think that we no longer have to mark those things off. We no longer have to measure our learning. And I think that while there's some truth behind the idea that school isn't the most effective necessarily, the most effective way to learn, it certainly is an effective way to learn. And one of the reasons I think it is because it has that metric system. It has feedback, which often we don't get except kind of in a weird, like, happenstance way, right? So an example of this, when you learn on the job, the only feedback a lot of us get when we learn on the job is either, hey, you get a raise, right? Or that project works. Functionally, it actually works. And instead of us actually going back and intentionally looking at the things that we've done and the things that we've learned, we kind of unintentionally get this feedback and then adapt, I guess, as part of our natural way of being, our natural way of responding to our situation. So in terms of measurement, one thing that you could do is just literally write down how productive you felt that day, as well as taking some notes about how many tasks you were able to complete. And then looking over that data, there's a million different ways to track data, right? And
Right.
it's kind of...
But how does writing things like what you accomplished or how you felt, how does that actually help you to learn?
I think it helps you when you go back and reflect, right? Because actually another thing I was watching recently, I think it was called Brain Games, right? It's on Netflix. And they were talking about the malleability of our memory. So we have the ability to remember things if we are doing it correctly, but when we choose to look back and reflect, that memory can actually be changed, like or physiologically or whatever. It's chemically, it's changed. And so now that memory can be shifted, and our retrospective, if you want to call it that, in the agile world is called retrospective. You go back and you look at the work that you've done, and you very well could be remembering wrong. So right after the fact, if you record how you've done, how you feel in that moment, it's a little bit more likely that you won't, erase that and change it. Whereas with your memory, you essentially can accidentally erase it and change it.
Interesting. Now, when I think about measuring something, I'm always thinking about measuring them against what? Like against goals, right? So, like, is that a part of your process, or are you more talking about like journal keeping? Or
it's kind of both. So it kind of comes down to what are you trying to accomplish? And so I could say that I want to, I don't know, become a jet pilot. And if I don't become a jet pilot, because that's an unrealistic goal for me at this point in my life, then I failed. But that's not really what we're talking about here, right? So being able to estimate properly, for instance, that's a part of this process. If you don't know how well you can learn or how well you can perform, if you aren't recording any of these things, then setting goals is just kind of a blind task anyway, right? Because you have no idea what you can accomplish. So it's possible to set a goal blindly at first and then say, okay, well, I made 80% of my goal, so that's probably my rate of completion at this point. If you have that kind of recording, then next time you can say, okay, it's more realistic for me to say, maybe 82% because I'm improving, hopefully, and we're going to shoot for 82% of the amount of things that I did last time.
That's really interesting. Let's jump next over to the addictions episode. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about that. In the addictions episode, you challenge your listeners to not listen to any podcasts in the next few days, and to take 5 or 10 minutes and just be still and just listen to themselves, listen to their ideas, listen to the birds chirping, what have you. What experience were you trying to provide for your listeners? Like, what was that about?
When I think about the great minds of past generations or this generation or hopefully in future generations, one thing that I don't see is them consuming constantly. And so when you think about, Einstein, for instance, he's not constantly trying to like level up his game. That's not his goal. Most of the time, what Einstein is doing is he's in the lab, right? He's actually doing the thing that Einstein did, right? So
Hmm.
I feel like it's very easy for us to get caught up in this cycle. And in that episode, I was talking more about like the behavioral addiction, but in reality, there's also a deeper addiction there to us trying to become something that we're trying to construct something out of all of these things that we are consuming. And so the idea behind the 5 to 10 minutes of silence is to say, okay, I'm going to be in control of what I do rather than the things around me controlling me. I want to, intentionally set this stuff aside and clear my mind. There's plenty of benefits, which I won't go into because I'm not the expert on this, but there's plenty of benefits to meditation and to stillness and to living in the moment, if you want to call it that. And it's not even, it's not like mystical in any way. A lot of it is scientifically, completely validated. And so the idea is to clear your mind and give yourself some space away from these things that are barraging you. As we talked earlier, we have these notifications that are coming in and we have these emails, and it's very easy for us to look at those things and say, hey, that's exciting. I really want to read that email. And the reason why is because many times those emails contain awesome stuff, right? So like, my wife and I, a lot of the beginning of our relationship was built on text messages. And so now every time I get a text message, my mind kind of triggers the same reward cycle that I got when my wife would text me, right? So like, but it may not be my wife texting me at all. It might just be my friend saying, what's up, dude? Like has no reward at all, no value other than my friend is bored. And so like, why can't I set that aside and instead focus on things that definitely have value, right? Because it's like you're not sure if the thing is going to have value, and very few times it will.
Yeah. So you value the
Yeah.
stillness.
So you value the stillness, the meditation, the moments for yourself.
I
You
do,
value
and I
those.
think that it's uncomfortable at first. So if you try it, if the people who are watching this, you try meditation tomorrow, you try 5 minutes of stillness. If you haven't ever done that, I can tell you right now, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable because you're not going to know what to do with your hands, and like you're going to be like, well, I should probably be reading my thing right now. But that's the point,
Right.
is why are you uncomfortable without it? So releasing your dependencies on these things so that when you go to them, you could be more intentional about what you do with them.
That comment about your hands, like I sometimes, like when nothing is happening, I just reach in my pocket and look at, like I don't even know what I'm looking at. I slide to unlock,
Yeah.
page through a little bit. I'm like, there's nothing here, and put it back. I feel like the worst, grossest person in the world for doing that. And it's just like this nasty little habit that I've developed over the past 4 or 5 years of using smartphones. It's so gross.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because even since I did that episode, I'm kind of preaching to myself, because I'll open up my
Sure,
phone
yeah.
and look at the stats for the podcast for the day or whatever,
Right.
and that reward system is like the number goes up. In fact,
Yeah.
Jeff Atwood, who created Stack Overflow and all that, he said that you have to be very careful when you put a number next to somebody's name online, because they're going to want to make that number go up. No matter what it's for, they're going to do something to try to make that number go up. And he's right. Like we enjoy these things for whatever reason. I don't know. It's deeply psychological stuff that I don't understand, I guess.
Oh yeah, you just need that shot of dopamine in the
Yeah,
back. Like,
exactly.
yeah, I'm doing good. I'm better
Yeah.
now. It's like my number went up. I'm a better
My
person.
clout score was raised. Yeah.
Clout score. Oh my gosh. So is this a regular practice of yours then? The
Meditation?
stillness.
I would
Yeah.
say that it's not as regular as I want it to be.
Okay.
But intentionally detaching myself from my phone is definitely a regular practice, and detaching myself away from my computer.
A colleague of mine wrote a Medium post about, he called it Digital Sabbath or something like that. The idea was that on Saturday they put their phones down and don't pick them up till the next day for 24 hours. And
I know quite a few folks in the tech industry that do this. In fact, Tim Ferriss actually does that as well.
yeah, that guy does everything.
Yeah,
what,
yeah.
what doesn't he do?
I don't know how he has time to do these things. He says that
when
he
I hear
takes
that something
his
that Tim Ferriss does, I go, yeah.
he takes his phone and puts it like in the garage, right? So like
Yeah.
the idea being to separate yourself, like not just at a mental level but also at a physical level, so that you have to put yourself through something to go back on whatever it is that you're separating yourself on, right? So
Totally.
you have to walk to the garage, and in the time that you're walking to the garage, maybe you'll rethink, maybe I don't need to go get my phone right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. The habit is a lot harder to accomplish, right? That dopamine is a lot harder to get if you're not just reaching your hand in your pocket and pulling out a phone. You're making the trek all the way down to the garage.
Right.
And if you have a detached garage,
Yeah. Well, and I do, so that would work for
there
me.
you go put it in another house. So I actually want to ask you about the challenge. So this was not just like you were not just talking about it. You actually challenged your audience. Have you had any response to that? Anybody giving you feedback on your challenge?
Nobody gave me feedback on the challenge specifically. I would welcome it. I'd love to hear what people thought of it. I think a lot of this resounds with a lot of people, but then like it's easy to just be like, oh yeah, I really like that podcast. Now what's the next podcast? You know?
Oh yeah, because then they're on
Yeah.
autoplay. Your next episode's going to start immediately after.
Exactly. This is particularly, I want to mention this because a lot of these things apply like in large, not just to developers, but there's a particular difference for developers that's important to note. And that is that we don't just use our computers for recreation. A lot of people use them for recreation and a little bit of work, but we use computers for like 99% of our work. And because of that, we have a pretty like close relationship with them. You know, I spend as much time with my computer as I do with my wife, you know? And so when I think about that, it's or really any of my friends or anything else. And so when I think about that relationship, I also have a relationship where I'm able to create things and do productive things on my computer. So it's easier for me to justify my constant connection with it. And so for that reason, we have to be hyper aware of how that affects our health and how it affects our mental state.
These are all very, very good points. So why don't we reissue that challenge anew? Dev tip audience, people, you guys are watching this. Jonathan gave this really, really, really great challenge to take some time. And, you know, after you're done watching this episode, or if you feel really passionate about the topic, you can just turn it off right now. and just take some time and reflect and look inwards, and look around you, and be aware. And we talk about, sorry, I dropped the thing. On Dev Tips, we talk about awareness, and we talk about being able to understand the world around you and your place in it. And this goes hand in hand. This is a tool that Jonathan is giving us to help us to become more aware of where we are, what we can do to make it better, and to influence those around us. This is awesome. Great challenge. So let's jump a little bit forward as well. Jonathan, you have an episode called Feelback versus Feedback, or maybe it's Feedback versus Feelback, but I've never heard the term feelback. Did you coin that?
Yeah, I did actually.
It's so appropriate. I'm like, when I remember I was walking to work when you pitched it, and I was like, feelback, what is it? I don't know. What is that? And then you explained it, and I was like, brilliant. It's just brilliant. Do you want to explain feedback versus feelback just like really shortly?
Yeah. So the basic idea is feedback is something that you can take and do something with, right? So let's say that you built a landing page in HTML and CSS, and somebody came to you and said, that text needs to be 3 pixels larger. Okay, that's good feedback, right? Because then you can go and into your IDE or whatever, and change that text to be 3 pixels larger, and the feedback has now been resolved. Feelback, however, is less actionable, and it's more emotional, right? So it's like a flavor of feedback, if you will, but
Yeah.
it's very difficult to act on it sometimes because somebody might come to you and say, "Oh, well, the text feels like it needs to be a little bit bigger," right? And even though that has some actionable elements to it, it's not totally actionable because you don't know how much bigger, right? And you also don't know why they feel that way. There's not really a rationale behind the feeling. And so that difficult gap between how they feel and the code that you're actually writing, 3 pixels larger, that is the gap that you and whoever is providing that feedback or feelback that you have to kind of merge that gap.
So I'm a designer. I don't actually develop for a profession, and you do, of course. Is that kind of feedback something that developers get? I'm not. I don't know, because I mean that sounds like design stuff, right? Like that needs to be bigger, make the logo bigger, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But like
So
what kind of feedback do you developers get?
we often will get something along the lines of, it feels a little bit slow, right? Or
Oh,
something even more ambiguous. It doesn't feel bright enough. It doesn't feel happy enough to me. And so even though the designer has already finished their side of things, now we're iterating in the browser, or we're iterating, on a phone, or whatever the final media is. We get this feedback of like, okay, well, the design is done, but now it's your turn, and it feels unhappy to me. Like, for instance, a project that I worked on one time was for a kids camp, and the feedback that I was getting was, it doesn't feel like camp to me. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so we worked through it, and we eventually came up with a solution. But that idea is that I have to translate "it doesn't feel like camp" into actionable code. I have to actually write code to make something that feels like camp, which is very difficult
camp
to
code,
do.
of course. Yeah. What's the best way to respond to feedback in your experience?
I think to ask more questions, right? So
Okay.
on that episode, I think I mentioned one way is to say, "Hey, can you show me something that does feel like camp," right? Or ask the question, "How much larger would make it feel right?" Right? Or what kind of, just basically get some ideas that are more concrete. So ask for them as a developer. Ask for that next step in the feedback loop. I think a lot of developers have a tendency to say, "Oh, well, that's ridiculous, and I'm just going to turn it off. Like, I'm not going to listen to you because what you're saying is obviously illogical," right? Like, I can't do anything with you saying that you feel a certain way, so I'm just going to, kind of ignore it until you give me a new design, or whatever. Instead,
I don't think that's developers only, man. I think we all kind
that's
of do
fair.
that,
Yeah.
right? Like from social people to managers, everybody. If they get something they don't want to interpret, they're like, "That's stupid."
and ultimately, I mean, it's your job. Like, it's my responsibility to be able to work with somebody, because that's the way their brain works, right? My brain works differently, and we have to work together to bridge that gap. There's a missing piece there that we have to understand, what the interface is from their feelings to my code.
Thank you so much for sitting with us for this long, man. I just have one more question for you. You have an episode where you talk about your tools. I think it's called "What I'm Using Lately," or what I'm using lately. And but when you open the episode, you start by saying that you shouldn't get caught up in fussing with your tools too much or worrying about them. In what way is it bad to get so excited and talk about your tools a lot and like compare tooling? When is that a bad thing?
So I recently actually wrote about this as well, and when I wrote about it, I mentioned the blacksmith, right? So for hundreds of years, the blacksmith's tool set doesn't change hardly at all. If you look at the blacksmith's tool set from like the 1500s and then the 16 and 1700s, they're almost going to be identical. It's very difficult to tell, which era a blacksmith's tool set came from, because they found tools that worked and there was no reason to change those tools. Now, obviously, sometimes there comes along something like the Industrial Revolution. Obviously, that changes things significantly to the point where blacksmith's tooling is basically like a thing of the past now. But for a very long period of time, those tools did their job and they did them well. So the idea is, to be a craftsman, you do have to know your tools very, very well. But if you're constantly changing tools, if you're constantly shifting from one set to the next, it's difficult to master any one thing, because by the time you've almost gotten to know one tool, if you're changing to another one, well, you have a whole new set of constructs to learn. So there's a massive gap in knowledge that you're going to have to kind of bridge that gap again.
Isn't there a fear of becoming outdated,
I would say so. There's a fear of it. And it's a legitimate fear. And I don't think that this is where development becomes hard, right? Because if you look at GitHub, though, GitHub is the source for most projects where they keep their open source code. I think it's the most popular source code repository in the world. I would imagine so. So GitHub is running an old version of Rails right now. And you would think that that's almost hypocrisy, right? Like the place that holds all the code is behind. They're not caught up yet with everyone else. And the truth is, their platform is working great for me. And it's probably working great for you. And they're extremely successful using a tool that is outdated. So my challenge to you is, consider whether the reason why you're becoming outdated, why you feel outdated, or why you're fearing being outdated, is just because other people are telling you so, rather than you're looking at the tool set and saying, well, this doesn't do the thing that I need it to do. If your tool set can do the thing that you need it to do, that's ultimately the definition of a tool.
Mm. Well, you're putting me out of a job, Jonathan. My job is to teach people new things. No, just kidding. That's really, really insightful. I think that we can get caught up in trying to understand like the latest thing and have an opinion on it, instead of just getting really good at the thing that is the most useful to us in the long term. That's interesting. Well,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for stopping by, or in this case, staying up really late for us. I appreciate it so much, and I know everybody that watches this also does. Can you tell us where to find your show?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on iTunes. So if you search DeveloperTea, it's also, if you're on your phone and you go to the podcast app, it's going to be in the top charts in technology, hopefully, for a while.
Just saying.
So you
humble
can find
brag.
it. Yeah. Hey, you know what? It's going to stay there. So it should be there. If you forget it, just hopefully you can browse and find it pretty easily. But developertea.com is also a very easy way. It has the iTunes link. It has an RSS feed. It has a Twitter account, which is also @DeveloperTea. And so those are the best ways.
That's it, man. Thank you so much for stopping by. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think this show's great, and I'm really excited to be on it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for Jonathan for stopping by. And Jonathan, would you please tell everyone to keep on hacking?
Keep on hacking.
We're done.
Nice.
Okay, stop. Do you want to record maybe 10 more minutes or something? Because I have a community that gets like extra stuff.
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't have any script or any plans for it, but we can just talk shop or something.
Sounds awesome.